running webinar. We did one, I think it was late September. So we have changed it up a little bit. And we're calling it 1 mile at a time, simple and effective ways to reduce running injuries. I am Jenny McAteer. I'm the owner of Resolve Physical Therapy and one of the staff physical therapists here. And running rehab is one of my more favorite things to do as a physical therapist. So I've been a physical therapist for almost 10 years now. And been at Resolve. I've had it open for about 2.5 years now. We're over on the west side. We usually tell people, if you know where Broken Top Bottle Shop is, we are right next door to them, same building. So I see lots of other outpatient orthopedic type injuries, but yeah, running is one of my favorites. So I'm excited to share some of the stuff we do for runners tonight. And then we have,
and I'll sneak in here. Hey everybody, I'm Jen Vermost, and the other half of the Jen and Jenny duo here at Resolve. I have been in the physical therapy field for almost 17 years now, and primarily been in outpatient orthopedics for most of that. I am an avid runner myself, so this is a topic that's very near and dear to me. So yeah, excited for you guys to learn all about the running stuff we have planned for you.
okay, so the 5 things we're going to kind of focus on tonight is we got a lot of good feedback from you guys when we sent out the text message on what you wanted to have covered. And so we hope within all these objectives, you'll get your answers for the most part. So number 1, we're going to kind of go over what the most important running muscles actually are. We're going to go over what a video gait analysis actually means, as well as a wearable sensor analysis, at least the type that we have here at Resolve. And we got a lot of questions about shoes. So we're going to go over shoe selection. And then we're going to go over some of the key beginning exercises, stretches, and strengthening that we give our runners. So the most important running muscles are the core, the quads, hamstrings, your calves, and your glutes. So we're going to go over each of those individually. So first we have the core. The core includes your back, which lots of people do not realize, your good old abs, of course, and the obliques next to them, and really technically includes your glutes, but we're going to focus on the back, abs, and obliques. And this is important for running because it's what connects you to your lower extremities. So it helps you keep an upright posture as you're running. It helps stabilize your trunk on those lower extremities. So it decreases some of the side-to-side wobbling motion is what we call it when we kind of watch people run. If they have a lot of side-to-side motion, they probably don't have a lot of good core strength or core stability. And if you have good core strength, then it's something that helps propel you forward. So you become a more powerful, more efficient runner too, if you have it. So if people have weak cores, a lot of times they'll end up having a lot of hip pain because the hips end up trying to do a little bit too much work. And that's when we end up seeing piriformis syndrome. That's when we end up seeing a lot of IT band syndrome. And then a lot of knee pain, which is probably the number 1 area that runners come in most often with complaints of is the knee pain, but it can start all the way back up at having a weak core. Second muscle is the quadriceps. So that big muscle on the front of your thighs there, divided into 4 parts. It helps us when we are trying to push off and keep going forward. But it also allows you to kind of bend your knee in a controlled manner. So when you hit the ground, it allows you to absorb a lot of shock if you have strong quads. And this is not one that is typically weak. It's actually the opposite. Usually it's almost a little bit too strong and kind of overpowers some of the other muscles, which can, that muscle type of muscle imbalance can put us more at risk for having injuries in the lower back and the pelvis, in your knees, and also in your hips. And for the hamstring, so this is muscles on the back of your thigh. It's divided into 3 parts. And it's what helps facilitate hip extension. Hip extension is when that leg gets back behind you. So it can be a very powerful muscle to help you propel forwards. And it also helps you from keeping your knee from hyperextending. So what this means for runners, if we go back to the quads being too strong, the muscle just on the opposite side of it there being the hamstrings, are usually too weak or they become too tight. And so this is where we'll end up seeing a lot of hamstring strains, hamstring tears, Really in other sports, it's why we see a lot of ACL tears. It makes you so you're just not as a powerful or as efficient of a runner. And any of you runners, if you've had a hamstring injury, you could probably agree that these types of injuries are probably the ones that become the most chronic for a runner is the hamstrings. So one you definitely don't want to mess with and you want to take care of. And then we have the calves. So it's the muscle down there on the lower leg that's divided into two parts. Someone had texted about what is the most important muscle. And this would be, in my opinion, one of the more important muscles. It decreases shock around the foot and ankle. So every time your foot hits the ground, it dampens the load. Every time you go to push off, that's what springs you forward. It does the most work, yet is probably where we get a lot of issues secondary to the knee. So this is where a lot of people end up with Achilles tendonitis, shin splints, hamstring strains, just consistently getting calf strains, calf cramping, that kind of a thing. And whether you're more of a short distance, long distance, road runner, trail runner, doesn't matter. This muscle to me does the most work. So it's one of the most important ones. And I forgot to mention, if you guys have questions along the way, you can type them in the chat, and we have Jen in the background that will answer them as I'm talking. And when we switch, I'll answer them as she's talking. So feel free to utilize that chat box, even though you guys are muted and can't see or anything. And last but not least is the glutes. So every runner that comes in always asks us about their glute strength. And so it's definitely one of those big words that you see amongst social media or any kind of article you bring up probably when you type in about runners and issues they might have with strength. So the glutes, in case you have not figured that out as a runner, are your butt muscles. There's three main muscles: glute max, glute min, glute med. Very important. It's the tie kind of between your core and your lower extremities. Holds your pelvis really level. So again, when we see a lot of people have a lot of side to side, or we slow it down, we'll see some hip drop, which I'll show you later on in the slideshow. It's what helps facilitate that hip extension with the hamstrings. So for those to work equally powerfully together, will make you one of the more efficient runners. It creates a ton of energy, a ton of power. And if it's weak, it causes a lot of problems. So if we have weak glutes, it sets off our lower back. If we have weak glutes, it can make us so that our knees cave in and don't have proper alignment. It can help us, if it's weak, it can affect our posture and how we're running. So when people have weak glutes, they can come in with complaints of having lower back pain, having hip pain or glute pain, which can be the piriformis syndrome, IT band syndrome. And then it can come in the form of knee pain as well. So one other of you guys had texted and asked where runners are usually most weak. And I would say, in my experience, the glutes are usually the most weak for people with hamstrings, probably close behind. But we have some of you guys who end up, being ultra runners, running 50 miles, 100 miles, and we'll get in here and test your glute strength, and it's awful. So this is the number one muscle we test probably that's most weak in runners. Okay, so next we're gonna go over the video gait analysis. I'm gonna send somebody the link that's texted me real quick, see if we can get her in. All right, see if that helps. I'm looking for Shelly if she gets in. Shelly. So a video gait analysis. First of all, everybody, let us know in the chat if you've had a video gait analysis. Let me start with that. And Jen will tell me the answers coming in.
So far, no.
No one's had one?
Mm-mm.
All right, lots of
But
no's.
probably should.
And probably should is right. That's where I'm headed with this. So Same thing when we asked this question, gosh, back in the fall, I think a majority of the answers were also no, which just surprises me so much with how much information it can give a runner. So part of it, I wonder, is if people don't know exactly what it is. So that's kind of what we're going to briefly go over here. And maybe that'll encourage you to get that video gait analysis. It's one of those easy things to do that can give so much information for a runner that can help prevent a lot of energy or injury and promote a lot of more efficiency. So a video gait analysis, you come in, you get on the treadmill. We take a video from different views. So we'll stand behind you and take a video. We'll stand on the side and take a video. And sometimes we'll even stand in front of you and take another video. And then we play it back in slow motion. So we have a TV in the clinic, so we airplay it back up on the TV. We go over in slow motion and we pick out key things in the running gait cycle and pick apart your mechanics a little bit. So I'll go over it a little bit more, but what I want you to know that it is not is it's not like we watch your video and then we say your knee needs to bend here, your foot needs to land here. It's not telling you really how to run. What it does is it gives us a lot more insight on where your weaknesses might be, on where your mobility issues might be, those kinds of things. So it just gives us a ton of information really on how to tell you then to strengthen and what to focus on for stretching or whatever it might be. So when we look at the back view of a runner, the first thing that we look at is your arm swing. So we're looking to see if your arms are going straight forward and straight back and not crossing over your midline. And so this runner in the picture is kind of the other thing we look at with the arms is if you hold them out away from your body, that's typically a sign to us that you have some core instability, some core weakness. And so then if you're holding your arms more towards your side and running back and forth is kind of the normal we're looking for. I'll have some more pictures on the next slide to kind of show a little bit, but we also look for what we call hip drop, hip whip, your step width, and then if you over pronate. So we don't like to just say pronation because that's kind of become just a taboo word that now people aren't just using very correctly. So really all people pronate. We all should at least a little bit to a degree. So it's really not a problem until it becomes an over pronation. So we look at that from the back view as well. So this first picture is showing a lot of hip internal rotation. And this is where we'll see a lot of the hip whip. So the leg kind of whipping around instead of carrying straight through. This can often be a core issue or a hip issue. But as you can see, instead of her knee being straight underneath her hip and being inside like that is going to wear out that knee after a little while if it hasn't already. The second one, my line dropped a little bit, looks like, but is actually showing a good example of level hips. And so when she's on one leg, we should see hips be level. So you can kind of look at the shirt line and notice that the shirt is level. It's not uneven there. And that means that she's got strong glutes, strong stable glutes. So and then if you compare that to this last picture here, she has a ton of hip drop on the right. So what this tells us is that she has a lot of hip weakness on that left side or some inhibition, meaning she doesn't really know how to tap into the glute strength that she might have. So she might be able to do, 100 clamshells or something, but for some reason, once she gets running or in a more dynamic position, it's just not turning on for her. So there's different exercises we'll give people to wake that up. Some people call it glute amnesia, if you've heard of that, glute inhibition, just ways to kind of make sure you're tapping into the glute strength. Okay, so then we go into a side view. So we take a video from the side, and what we kind of focus on for the side is looking at your posture. So this first runner in the gray shirt kind of shows a good posture. She's slightly leaning forward, which is going to help you with momentum as you're going forward, running forward. It'll help you to continue that direction efficiently. The second runner's not quite as good. She's got a lot more upright posture, so she's going to have to pull herself along a lot more, and it makes her become a lot less efficient. And then secondarily, we go straight down to look at how you strike the ground. So another big myth buster here for some people is that heel striking is not necessarily bad. So what we should be looking at first is how you do hit. Heel strike, midfoot, forefoot. Midfoot is most ideal. But then we look at where you strike. So this becomes your stride length. So if you're a heel striker landing way out in front of you with a long stride length, that's probably not going to be very good for you. You're going to end up with definitely some issues in your knees or in your legs, up in your back even. But if you're a heel striker, landing pretty close to your center of mass, you have a good cadence, good stride length, it's not going to be as big of a deal as people make it sound. So we look at all of that when we look at your video and slow it down. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Jen here for a moment.
Okay. So another part that we like to do with a running analysis is we actually have some sensors that we use called DorsaVi. And so the DorsaVi is, as you see in the picture here on the left, they're two tiny little wearable sensors that we just attach to your shin. And you're able to wear this when you are running either on the treadmill when we're videoing you for the video analysis, or we can sync the sensors and you can actually run outside with them on. So these are designed to be worn kind of in your natural running environment. So it's a little bit different than having a running analysis performed in like a biomechanics lab where you're running on force plates and you have all these cameras and you're on a treadmill. These sensors you can wear outside. So if you are more of a trail runner, that type of situation, these work perfectly because we will get some really good data with you running where you normally like to run. And as a runner myself, I can attest that I'm not a fan of the treadmill, as most of us are not. We like to be outside. We live in beautiful Bend. And so the weather is always conducive for running. So these sensors are fantastic for capturing that data in your natural environment. And so here at Resolve, we're the only clinic in Central Oregon that has them. There's only one other clinic in the state of Oregon that uses the DorsaVi. So we are very fortunate to have these in our clinic, and they provide us with a ton of great data. So I'm going to go over a little bit of that with you so you can kind of see more so of the numbers that we get and how we interpret that. So it's a little bit of kind of some nerdy data, which we absolutely love, but we love teaching our patients this. And so you can see pretty much how you're running and moving from one leg to the other. So one of the things that DorsaVi will provide us is something called ground reaction force. So this basically allows us to look from one leg to the other to see how much force you are experiencing from one side to the other. So with ground reaction force, you're not really looking for a specific number per se. This is going to be different for everybody. So if you're a heel striker, that's going to change your ground reaction forces. Your body weight is going to impact that. Your cadence, or how fast you're moving your feet, that will also impact the ground reaction force. So again, there's not really a magic number that you're looking for, but you're definitely looking to be symmetrical side to side. So you don't want to see, more force going through one leg and less through the other, because the leg taking the more force is probably going to be more prone to injury and things like that. So you can kind of see, this is one of the graphs that we get with the running analysis. So you can kind of see on this particular runner, they were slightly higher on the right side, but again, still within the norm. And so it is normal to have a slight deviation. You're never going to be probably perfectly symmetrical. I think I've only seen that once in the running analysis that I've done. So, but as long as you stay kind of within that 5% range, then you are looking pretty good in terms of the symmetry there. The next thing that DorsaVi will show us is something called initial peak acceleration. So essentially this kind of translates more so into how much control do you have kind of through the foot and the lower leg as you are striking the ground. And so typically, if you have a lower IPA, it typically tends to mean that you're a more efficient runner, meaning that you have better control through the lower leg and the foot. So a higher IPA value that can be associated with a higher risk for things like a stress fracture. Again, if you have, maybe a previous foot or ankle issue and you just don't have as good of control through the foot, maybe it's a mobility issue. A lot of different things can influence the IPA. This actually is the running analysis that was done on myself. And so ironically, I do have some issues on my left side that I'm working through, but you can see definitely the left side versus the right side, how big of a discrepancy there is. And so this does highlight some other key issues too of, maybe you are running pain free. Maybe you don't have a current issue, but there could be something lurking in the background that is putting you at risk for an injury. And so DorsaVi will help to identify that as well. And then the other thing that we get from DorsaVi is something called ground contact time. So basically what this means is, how long is your foot on the ground? So from the time you hit the ground to the time you get off of that foot, how much time are you spending on the ground? So keep in mind, this is a relatively short period of time. This is measured in milliseconds. So if you think about how fast our feet turn over, you're not on the ground for a long period of time, but that period of time does matter. And so again, you're looking for, symmetry from side to side. If we see a difference in the ground contact time of usually 20 milliseconds or more, then we start to get a little bit more concerned in terms of why that's happening. You can see ground contact time being affected by somebody who has pain. So, for example, if you have issues with your right side, maybe your right knee or your right foot, you're not going to want to spend a lot of time on that side. So, when you're experiencing pain, a lot of times you'll have a shorter ground contact time because you're trying to get off that leg. Um, on the other hand, if you don't have any issues, no pain, nothing like that, you feel like you're running fine, and you're still having a lag in the ground contact time, you might have a history of maybe like a tendon issue or like a hamstring strain or something like that. If you're running pain free, but you still see a lag in the ground contact time, that's usually because there's less responsiveness through the muscles. So the muscles just aren't reacting as quickly as they could. And so, again, that usually translates more into a tendon issue, maybe a strength issue, things like that. So, these three things are things that when we do our running analysis with the video, we can't measure these things. We can't see this with the naked eye. These are very, very minute measurements that occur. And so the DorsaVi is fantastic for picking up on these little things, and it helps key us in a little bit further into what is potentially happening with you while you're running. And also, the potential risk that you have for injury too. The other thing that DorsaVi will measure is your cadence also. And so I think a lot of runners generally are familiar with cadence, but if you're not, cadence is the number of steps that you're taking per minute. So cadence really, it's not that it has nothing to do with your pace, but it's different than your pace. And so basically, the cadence is the number of steps you're taking per minute. It's not how fast you're actually running. And so you can be running, like a 10-minute mile, for example, and be running at a cadence of 150 steps a minute, or you can run a 10-minute mile and run at a cadence at 170 steps a minute. So, again, it's how quickly are your feet turning over when you're running. And so I think this all started happening. This cadence kind of became the big buzzword in the Olympics a number of years ago. There was a gentleman who was actually counting the cadence of these really successful runners. And he realized that the runners that were at a very high performing level were actually running at about 180 steps per minute. And so somewhere that became the norm for what cadence should be. And so keep in mind that not everybody will hit 180 steps per minute. It's not often a normal number for people either. So take, for example, somebody who is taller. So if you are taller, you typically have longer legs. Your cadence generally is not going to be 180 because you're going to be able to take longer steps and cover distance further. So you'll have a harder time hitting that 180 cadence. And so again, why this really matters is we know that runners who have a slower cadence typically have more of that ground reaction force and more of that force that's going up through the legs as they run. So cadence is something that we do look at, and we often will work with people on how to improve their cadence just to improve the efficiency of the running as well, and then decrease those forces through the legs. So one of the ways that we do that is we like to cue people to take smaller but quicker steps. which is sometimes easier said than done. This is a little bit of a process to work through. So we like to get the baseline cadence and kind of see where you're at. And when you're trying to improve cadence, you're not wanting to drastically change this all at once. So you're not wanting to be, for example, like if you look at these examples down here, this runner on top, her cadence was 157. So you don't want to take somebody who's running at that cadence and suddenly tell them, okay, now you have to run at 170, because chances are it's not going to go well. This is a small incremental change that needs to happen over time. And so, what we typically do is recommend that our runners will increase their cadence by 5 steps per minute. So, let's say, for example, you're running at a cadence of 155. So, we would say, okay, why don't you opt for trying to work up to 160? Do that for a little while, make sure you adapt to that. Things are good. Okay, let's try to bump you up to 165. So, it's a very slow, gradual process. There are a lot of things that can help with this too. Technology has been amazing. There's a number of apps that you can download on your phone. You can go onto Spotify or Pandora or whatever music app that you use and typically search and find like a playlist or a music playlist, and we'll typically have a range of cadence through there. Some of them are, 160 to 165. And so you can just kind of run to the beat of the music, which can also be helpful to you. But again, this is something that we do look at, and it is relatively important, but it's one of those things where it does require some intermittent progress over time. So it's not something that's going to change drastically real quickly. Okay, so we are about halfway there. Don't forget, if you have any questions, comments, things like that, be sure to drop those in the chat box or the Q&A. Jenny will be answering those as I continue talking on here. So the next topic, which was a hot topic that we got a lot of feedback on, was everybody wanted to know about shoes. So we are going to dive into the shoe topic and hopefully cover some basics on that and give you guys a little bit better info. And then we're going to dive into some of the exercises that we prescribe for our runners too. And then at the very end, we'll have some other details and information for you as well. So how to choose a shoe. If only it were as easy as Cinderella had it, where you put a shoe on and it fits perfectly. As a runner myself, I've been through the process. It's sometimes really difficult to find a shoe that you love. And then it never fails when you find a shoe that you love. You wear it for a year, maybe you buy another pair, and then they discontinue it. It seems like that is always the case. So choosing a shoe is more so about, finding the necessities that you need in a shoe. So then you can figure out the one that's going to work best for you. So a couple of things to consider is the function of the shoe is to protect your foot from the ground and improve comfort while you're running. Shoes are not designed to change how you run. So it's kind of like Jenny said earlier, when we do the running analysis, we're not here to overhaul everything. So that's the same thing with a shoe. The shoe is not designed to fix anything about your running. The shoe is going to help improve your comfort as you run, and make sure that your foot is supported as you run. So keep that in mind. It's not the fix for a lot of things. It's an adjunct to other things that have to be done as well. So when you go into a shoe store, as you all know, the options can be incredibly overwhelming. So a couple of the main things to consider. First of all, the running surface. Are you going to be running on the road? Are you going to be running on trail? Because road shoes and trail shoes are designed very differently. The stability in the shoe is a little bit different. The tread in the shoe is definitely different. So that's a big key thing is if you are a road runner or a trail runner, or you do both, I recommend having a shoe for both. So I personally have a road shoe and a trail shoe because you need that adaptability. And you need those shoes to function differently in different environments too. The other thing is, we'll talk a little bit more about this in a little bit, is the types of shoes. So do you need a cushion shoe? Do you need a neutral shoe? Do you need a stability shoe? All these things can be incredibly overwhelming. So we'll go through that and kind of give you a little bit more information on that, as well as how to properly fit a shoe, because this is very important. If you are a runner and you've ever dealt with black toenails or things like that, that's usually from improper fitting of your shoe. So we'll touch base on that a little bit. And then also a little bit with the running style. So like Jenny alluded to, are you a heel striker? Are you a midfoot striker? Are you a forefoot striker? Sometimes that will influence your choice of footwear as well. And then the other thing to remember too is that not everything is supposed to work for a certain foot type. So not everything is always going to be comfortable. So instead of recommending a specific shoe, it's almost better to kind of understand and be familiar with the basics of a shoe and kind of know what you're looking for. And then that can narrow down your selection a little bit too. So the common mistakes with running shoes is actually buying the wrong size. So believe it or not, one of the big mistakes that people make is trying on the shoe at the wrong time of day. So as you're up on your feet throughout the day, your feet naturally swell. That just comes with, being in that gravity dependent position. When you're on your feet a lot, typically your feet will be bigger towards the end of the day. So keep that in mind. If you normally run in the morning, go shoe shopping in the morning. If you normally run in the afternoon or evening, maybe at the end of your workday, go shopping for shoes then, because your foot is going to be more of your natural normal size in that situation. And so that usually tends to work better in terms of finding a shoe that's kind of more optimal for your foot. The other thing to consider as well is whatever type of sock that you run in, make sure you wear that when you're trying on shoes too. So don't wear a thick sock when you go try on your shoes and then go turn around and run in a thin wicking sock, because the shoe will fit differently. So keep that in mind too. And then no matter what happens, the shoe should be comfortable. You shouldn't feel like you should have to break in a shoe to make it more comfortable. As soon as you pick that shoe up and put it on, you should feel pretty good about how it fits. So there should never be this sort of learning curve or this breaking in period of shoes to make it fit better. The other thing is wearing the shoes too long. So the recommended amount of mileage for shoes is about 400 to 600 miles. Or if you're a recreational runner, about every 6 months or so. The other thing to keep in mind too is when you have a pair of running shoes, use those shoes only for running. Don't use them to walk the dog. Don't use them to go grocery shopping. Don't use them to mow the yard. Use your running shoes only for running. That way you can better track the miles. There's a lot of running apps that you can use that you can input your shoe in there and it'll keep track of the miles for you. But that's the biggest thing, is only use your running shoes specifically for running. Have extra shoes or maybe old pairs of running shoes that you use for everyday type things too. Mistake number 3 is assuming that the shoe will be magic. Again, the shoe is not meant to substitute for poor running form. If you have any muscle imbalances, if you have any nagging injuries that are occurring, the shoe is not magically going to fix that. Those are other things, underlying issues that need to be addressed. So keep that in mind, that the shoe is not going to be some magic cure for a lot of things. You kind of have to go about it from a very holistic perspective and kind of addressing everything as a whole. Again, the shoe is kind of an adjunct to all these other things that we recommend that you do as well. And then lastly, choosing a shoe because it's the latest and greatest, or because it's on sale, or because it looks really, really cool. The one thing is, and I think it's become a little bit more of an issue, is the latest and greatest. We all want the best thing that's come out on the market. And so that's not always the best thing for you, is the problem. And whatever your friends might be running in, they may love it. That doesn't mean it's the proper shoe for you either. So, and keep in mind too, that cheaper isn't always better. So choosing a shoe because it's on sale may seem cheaper, in the immediate, but if those shoes end up being the wrong one for you and it ends up causing an injury or things like that, you may end up paying for it down the road, dealing with an injury because you bought the wrong shoe. So typically cheaper isn't better when it comes to a running shoe. And the other thing is, if you just have this nice flashy looking shoe, it doesn't make you faster. So a lot of running shoes are, really bright colored, or, they're sometimes pretty obnoxious looking. And so the one thing I always tell people is you buy a shoe for function, not for looks. And so it may be the most obnoxious color ever, but if it's the right shoe for you, then it's the right shoe for you. And so never pick a pair of shoes because it looks cool or it matches your outfit or it's your favorite color. You definitely have to pick the shoe because it's right for your foot. And the other thing we usually recommend too is that people, I think, sometimes get a little bit intimidated, especially if you're new to running. People get intimidated to walk when they walk into like a specialty shoe store because, it is overwhelming to see the number of shoes that you can choose from in there. But typically, when you're walking into a specialty shoe store, they can help you find the shoe that's right for you as well. We personally love Foot Zone in town. They have always treated our runners really well. They're incredibly knowledgeable. So don't be afraid to go into a store like that because you're going to come across people who are very knowledgeable and can help make a good recommendation for you as well. Okay, so let's talk about the anatomy of the shoe a little bit. So first want to cover the midsole. So I call this the heart and soul of the shoe. It really is the most important part of the shoe in terms of the cushioning and stability. So typically there is like a nice thick layer that has some shock absorbing and supportive materials in it. Usually it's either like an air or a gel, things like that. There's been a lot of biomechanic research done on the midsole. It's not really showing an advantage of one material over another. Every shoe manufacturer uses different materials, to meet their custom style of shoe. And so this material would kind of be a little bit different. Same thing too when you're talking about the type of shoe. So is it a neutral shoe? Is it a stability shoe? Is it a cushion shoe? Those all have different midsoles to them. And so with the midsole, you're basically, when you put the shoe on, you're looking for something that's not too soft, but not too firm either. Like it should feel pretty comfortable and it shouldn't feel like it's too heavy for you either. So this is a thing I've mentioned a couple times now. So neutral versus motion control or stability versus a cushion shoe. So a lot of this has to do with the arches in your feet, and a lot of it has to do with, do you supinate? Are you more of a neutral position with your foot, or do you overpronate as well? So these pictures down here are regarding a left foot. So this would be supination, meaning that you strike a little bit more and stay more to the outside of the foot. Neutral means you kind of land in the supination, then you move into pronation, and then you go back to supination, which is the normal running mechanics. But your foot stays relatively neutral there. And then you have some overpronation. So when your foot strikes, your ankle or your foot kind of moves inward excessively. So again, like Jenny said, there's a certain degree of pronation that is normal, that happens in everybody, but you're looking for that overpronation. So again, so a neutral arch, when you stand, typically you'll see a foot that looks kind of like this one on the left here. A flat arch, you'll be able to see more of your foot. And then if you have a high arch, you'll be able to see less of your foot. So in terms of that, a neutral shoe is typically designed for people who are kind of more in the neutral position, or they are pretty mild pronators, meaning that they move into pronation, but it's not excessive pronation. So those people tend to do pretty well in a neutral style shoe. The motion control or stability shoe is typically designed for people who overpronate. So this typically has more support through that midsole area to help reduce some of that overpronation as well. So those are the shoes that are typically recommended for people who do overpronate. And then in the opposite end of the spectrum, the cushion shoe is typically for people who land more into that supinated position. When you stay supinated, you don't absorb the force quite as well through your foot. So that's why they provide that cushion through the shoe, is to help reduce some of that force that's going through the foot there. So these three are the main, or three or four types are the main types of shoes that you'll see in the shoe store in terms of the neutral, the stability, or the cushion type shoe. So again, it kind of relates more so to your arch, and then also if you're supinating or moving into that overpronation area. Okay, toe box. This is one that I think a lot of people are fairly familiar with in terms of the anatomy of a shoe. So the shoe here on the left, this is just a regular Nike tennis shoe. The shoe here on the right is an Ultra. Ultra is notoriously known for having a wider toe box. So the toe box is basically the width from one edge of the shoe to the other edge of the shoe. So with the toe box, you want your feet to be able to kind of move around a little bit. You don't want your toes to feel scrunched in. So if you want to compare it to like a high heel shoe has virtually no toe box. So that's very, very narrow. But what you're looking for, kind of just looking for general fit of a shoe, is from the top edge of the shoe here to where the furthest edge of your longest toe is. You want that to be 1/2 to 1 thumb width from the edge of the shoe to your edge of your toe. So that's kind of looking from top down here. So you want to make sure that you have enough room at the end of your toe. The other thing I think sometimes people forget is in the toe box is the width too. So you actually want to have a little bit of wiggle room on the outsides of your feet as well. So one thing that we like to recommend people do is if you pull out the insole of your shoe and put it down on the floor and then step your foot right on top of it. And you can kind of see how much room there is. So right through here, you can see there definitely is a 1/2 to 1 thumb width from would be the big toe here to the very edge. What you're looking for here is on the lateral edges here. You want to have about a 1/2 of a thumb width from side to side too. So you can see here, this shoe might be a little bit narrow, kind of right through this inside edge at the bottom of the big toe here, but definitely want to have a little bit of thumb width from side to side. Again, if you're getting too much compression and your toes are being squeezed inward, that's when you typically will kind of have issues with toenails, either black toenails or losing toenails or things like that. And so you definitely want some wiggle room for your feet inside the shoe there. The other big consideration is shoe drop. So this has kind of become also a hot topic as well. When the barefoot running craze all started, everybody was moving to zero drop shoes. The thing to remember is that a zero drop shoe is not meant for everyone. So basically what drop is when you look at, so if you look at the shoe here on the left, if you look from the back edge here, and you go all the way down to the front edge, it's basically how angulated is the shoe, and it's measured in millimeters. And so this traditional running shoe typically has about 10 millimeters, sometimes more. I've seen them up to in the 20s from a drop. So basically when you have a higher drop, you're putting a little bit more stress on the hip and the glute, but you are giving a little bit more slack to your calf muscle because you're actually kind of raising your heel, which is giving a little bit of slack to that gastroc area. When you go to a zero drop shoe, when you're looking at the very back of the shoe and going all the way forward to the front, it means it's completely level. There's no angulation whatsoever. The thing about a zero drop shoe is it does put a lot more stress on your calf. So you need to have excellent strength through your lower leg and through your foot to be able to tolerate a zero drop. The other thing to remember as well is when you're looking at your running style. So kind of like what Jenny was saying earlier about heel striking not being bad. If you're a heel striker and you're hitting pretty hard through your heel, typically you're not going to tolerate a zero drop shoe because there's just no cushion when that heel hits the ground. So typically people who are heel strikers like to have at least a little bit of a drop through there. Most people who are more of a midfoot striker do better in a zero drop shoe. But again, it all depends on if you have the strength and stability through your calf and through your foot to be able to tolerate a zero drop shoe. So if anyone is trying to transition from a traditional shoe to a zero drop shoe, again, it's one of those things where you don't make that change overnight. It is a slow process because you are changing the forces that go through your leg just by changing the angle of the foot. So keep that in mind. Again, when the barefoot running craze became such a thing, we had all these people transitioning to zero drop shoes. And the theory was that, we should run how we were meant to run. We didn't have these big, thick cushion shoes years and years and years ago. But the problem was a lot of people weren't built or hadn't trained adequately to be able to transition to the zero drop. So keep that in mind. If it's something that you've heard about, if it's something that you're considering, that is important to remember as well. So getting into some of the key exercises, a lot of people had sent us questions asking about stretching and some specific strengthening stuff. So I'm going to touch on the stretching first, and then I'll let Jenny take over and finish with all the strengthening stuff. So when it comes to stretching, we highly recommend doing a dynamic warm up. So you want to always do some sort of warm up, typically about 3 to 5 minutes in length. Basically, what you're wanting to do is improve the circulation that's going through your muscles, slowly get your heart rate increasing, work on some range of motion, kind of get your joints loosened up. Your body will respond much better if you do even just a brief dynamic warm up versus if you finish work, you slap on your shoes, you head out the door and you just take off and run. There was a study that was done that was looking at runners on a treadmill, and those who actually did a dynamic warm up performed better and were able to run longer than those who did not do a warm up. So there's a lot of different ways that you can do a dynamic warm up. If you go to our social media, either at our Instagram page at Resolve PT Bend, or we also have a YouTube channel as well. We have tons of videos on there specifically talking about ways to do a dynamic warm up. You can find all that information there. There's great videos too. So it'd be much easier to kind of check that out on the social media. But we do recommend doing, that dynamic warm up for about 3 to 5 minutes before you take off on the run. In terms of stretching afterwards, that's typically where you want to see more of the static stretching. So trying to target those larger muscle groups, specifically looking at stretching your glutes, stretching the quads, the hamstrings, the calves, all those big muscle groups that just were worked really hard in your run. So we don't typically recommend the static stretching before you run. That's actually been shown to impede performance. But it is beneficial to do some stretching, kind of include that in your cool down after you run as well. So again, tons of great stuff on our social media. You can go check out those videos and even on our YouTube channel. So there's lots of information out there for you too. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Jenny and she will cover the strengthening stuff.
All right, hanging in there. So we picked kind of some of our favorite beginning strengthening exercises for runners that we picked one that would kind of each go with the important muscles that we talked about at the beginning of the webinar. So one of my favorite core ones is called a dead bug. And so the dead bug is where you lay flat on the ground. And you can use a ball like it shows in the first picture, or if you don't have one, you can do it just like it shows me in the second picture. So you lie on the ground, you bring up your hips to about 90 degrees. If you have the ball, then you put the arms up there, or if you don't have the ball, you put your hands right in front of your knees and you just push against each other. So some of these exercises are harder than they look or sound. So definitely give them a try first before they look too easy for you. The key here for this one is keeping your back flat. So a lot of people that tell me this is easy, when I have them do it, they typically are doing it wrong. So the first thing you need to make sure is keeping your back flat. So when you have a weak core, or maybe you're tired or losing endurance, the first cheat kind of in this exercise is your back starts to arch up off of the ground. So even after 2 or 3 repetitions, making sure that you check that your back is still flat. So keep your back flat, and then you just press all 4 extremities into the ball, or the hands right against your knees. We usually say try to do at least 10 for 10 seconds. And that's a super good core engagement. And I think we have progressions of this on our YouTube channel as well. Number 2, we kind of talked about quad strength. So we like to go into single leg squats. So single leg is also some of our more favorite types of exercises to give runners, because you're pretty much on one leg at all times. So we like to make sure each leg can perform equally as well. So single leg squats, just like Jen has shown in the picture in there, is you squat down without letting your knee fall inward. So it's helpful to do it in front of the mirror the first few times if you haven't done this one. And not letting your knee go too far in front of your toes. Some of it's fine, but you want to make sure that you're not doing it too much. And with this one, again, it's harder than it looks. So if you're not used to doing this, you want to make sure that quality over quantity. So quality is important for exercises. So start off with maybe not going quite as deep until you really feel like you have good control of the movement. You don't see that knee falling inward. We always say if you're trying to picture that your kneecap is lined up over your second and third toe. And that will help from the knee going too far in. And people should, runners, if you're doing multiple miles per week, you should be able to do a good 15 to 20 of these without losing balance and being able to end up hopefully going fairly deep with it. All right, this one is one of my favorites. I give maybe second, I'd probably say that on all of them. I like giving runners strengthening exercises. This one I like to call poor man hamstring curls. So again, if you remember, hamstrings are one of the muscles that we're not very good at giving any focus to on strengthening. And so this one is also one that is way harder than it looks. So definitely give it a go. I don't know if anybody's ever done like too many calf raises and then like had a hard time walking the next day. This is kind of like that. For people who don't do isolated hamstring strengthening, you do 10 to 15 of these a couple of times and you'll definitely be sore on your hamstrings. So with this one, you lie on the ground and then you get a chair or a bench, aerobic step, whatever you have. And you stick one leg up on there and make sure that it's just your heel. So we don't want your entire calf resting on the chair. We want just your heel on the chair. And then your other leg goes straight up in the air. And then we say, brace your abdominals, tighten your core, however you want to put it, squeeze your glutes, and then you're bridging up off of the ground. So with your heel only intact with that chair, it's really going to isolate out those hamstrings and definitely give you a good burn. So give that one a go. It's a good one that can be done anywhere. Okay, and then we talked about the calves being one of the muscles that does the most work. And again, people just aren't very good at strengthening these. So again, we like to do single leg calf raises, not both at once. You'd be surprised how many people can do 30 to 40 of them double leg, but once you go into a single leg is when we start seeing the struggles. So as you're doing it, you want to make sure you keep your knees straight so that you are engaging the right calf muscles. You're just coming up on your tippy toes. You can touch a wall for some balance. We don't want to test your balance at this point. We want you to be able to focus on the movement so you can strengthen your calves. And anytime we're doing an analysis on a runner, Jen and I always make sure that people can at least do 25 single leg calf raises. So we use this as a measurement to be able to return to running safely, especially if you've had Achilles injuries going on, calf strains going on, those types of things. Or we use it just as an initial measurement when you come in to kind of test where you stand on your calf strength, foot and ankle strength. So try it out. You should be able to do 25 on each leg if you're really running anything more than a mile at a time. So very important one. Okay, so then we have high knee marches with the arm overhead. So this is going to pull in your glutes as well as your core a little bit. And then if you add the weight overhead like she's holding, it makes it even more challenging. So you're just walking. A lot of people will use their hallway, their driveway, parking lot, whatever you want to be able to walk back and forth. And you just raise that weight up overhead. So it's going to kind of make you want to do that side to side wobbling thing if you have a poor core. So it'll make you engage your core there. And then as you march, you kind of lift that other leg up, right? And it's making you have to use your glute strength to be able to stabilize everything there. So we always say, make sure you feel that core is engaging, keep that spine tall, don't end up slouching forward with it. And really focusing on not getting a lot of the side to side wobbling movement. Stay nice and strong that way. And it's sounds again simple, but quite a fundamental exercise that if you can do this without a lot of wobbling side to side or a lot of hip dropping as you're trying to go through it, it will definitely translate over into your running mechanics. Okay, so we added this one because we had a lot of people kind of asking again about shoes and about feet and having high arches or no arches and all the above. So this is what we call toga, and it is a real thing. So toe yoga, toga, whatever you want to call it. I believe we have a video of this on our Instagram as well. Um, and it really helps with building a good, strong arch. It helps with your intrinsic foot muscles. The feet are often just a bit ignored, although they're the things that hit the ground every single time when we're running. So should have some focus there. And so the idea of it here is kind of the first picture is pushing down your big toe and not through the tip of your toe, back through that big knuckle part of your toe. And so if you can push that down and lift up your little toes independently of it, you'll feel some good arch strengthening there. And then the opposite. So then putting down all your little toes and picking up your big toe opposite of that. So then you're getting the opposite kind of top intrinsic muscles going for the big toe, which is very important for running. And this one, if you can't do it at first, this is one that's more like just practice, 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 and you'll realize even within just a couple of days how much better you are at it. But there are some, running gurus that swear by this one on giving you better foot control, helping stabilize your foot, even helping your feet from, especially as we age, wanting to just grow bigger. That'll help keep all of that a little more stabilized for you. Okay, so in summary, a lot of the text messages that came in were talking a lot about how to prevent injuries. So we wanted to kind of circle back and say all the above that we kind of just went over is a really good way to prevent injuries. So making sure that you have a running mechanics check. There's sometimes some of the easiest things that we can fix that's going to just save your knees or your hip. Cadence check. So if you don't know your cadence, that's low hanging fruit. That can save a lot of mechanics issues, even on your own, trying to figure out where that's at. So, a lot of you guys have the watches that will even count it for you, but if not, make sure you get on top of that. And I, would suggest counting it at the beginning of your run and at the end of your run or in the middle of your run, wherever pain starts in your run. And making sure that you do a good mechanics check, especially if you're wanting to run for a long time. And then, whether you're a beginning runner or a veteran runner, always good to check in and make sure you have some good running mechanics, appropriate shoe type and appropriate rotation of those shoes. So paying attention to all those tips and tricks that Jen went over to make sure you get a shoe that actually works for you and your running mechanics type, your foot type, and not just trying to fit in with the latest fad kind of a thing. And a good strength training routine. Runners are getting better about this, but gosh, 10 years ago when I first started working with runners, there's very few that had any kind of strength training routine. And if you want to prevent injury, you need to have a basic, at least, strength training routine to keep those muscles up to par. And then a good mobility and stretching routine. So just as Jen went over, as far as kind of a dynamic warm up to begin with, you don't need much room. Hop out of your car, do it in the parking lot, whatever, but get things going. And then doing a good stretching routine afterwards. IT band syndrome and those things most of the time end up being because people have tight hips. So you got to have good mobility, especially as we start getting over the age of 30 to 35. Mobility becomes even more important for these types of things. So making sure you have a good mobility and stretching routine. All of these things will help prevent injuries, prevent overuse of certain muscles, and make sure that you can kind of keep running for the long term. So thanks for joining us for today. So sorry about all the technical difficulties that we had on getting that Zoom link out to you. But we had kind of come up with what we're calling the glutes, shoes, and running evaluation. So if you were to come in for an appointment, we are charging only $150. And what we're going to do is we're going to give you a strength test, a mobility test. Bring in your running shoes and we'll go over a diagnostic of those to make sure they're kind of the right ones that you need to be in. We'll do a video gait analysis and we'll give you a report of those findings, what they are, what they mean, And then, of course, with all of those things, it allows us to give you an even more tailored exercise prescription to make sure that you're going to be on the right track for continuing with your running. So for joining us as well, we are going to also throw in the DorsaVi wearable sensor analysis. So typically we charge $100 just for the sensor analysis. But we're going to throw that in. And then FootZone was kind enough to give us some $10 gift cards. So over $300 easy, if not more, that we're going to give for $150 if you call to sign up in the next 7 days. So your appointment doesn't have to happen in the next 7 days. I know how life is, but we'd like you to call in the next 7 days so that we can make sure we find you a good time slot on our calendars. This is covered by insurance as well. So if you have insurance and you'd rather not pay cash, we take all major insurances. Feel free to call us, email us, and let us know what you have, and we can tell you if we take it. For the most part, there's not a lot of referrals needed by a doctor to come to us anymore. I think Medicare and Medicaid are some of the few that do, but again, let us know what you have and we can let you know pretty quickly if we need to figure that out. But most major insurances don't require a doctor referral. You can come straight to us. Okay, so thank you again for joining Jen and I on this running webinar. This picture here was the one that got the most clicks for signing up for the webinar. So we thought we'd end with it. Jen thought that maybe you all related very well to her. That is Jen there on how she felt at the end of a run. So let us know if you have any questions and we'll try to get back to you via email. You can email us at resolveptbend@gmail.com and we'll try to get back to you best we can there. But best, most easiest and efficient way to answer everybody's questions and give you the right answers is to kind of have a proper evaluation. So give us a call for Resolve Physical Therapy to, again, get that lovely glutes, shoes, and running evaluation that we're offering at this point. So thank you. Have a good night. And hopefully this was helpful. We'll ask for feedback later on. All right. Have a good night.